Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Nedarim Daf Ayin Beis. Begin on the middle of Daf Ayin Aleph and Beis, 4 lines up or down from the bottom of the Amud, where the Gemara is going to introduce an interesting question that will relate back to the halacha of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah on the previous Amud spoke about if a woman was engaged and she made a neder, which again, this is the topic of our parak, Rasa, where her father and her husband / chasen are together being made for her neder. But she gets divorced that day that she took the neder. She gets engaged even 100 times. Because as long as she didn't go out l'rshus asma, they too are going to be made for the neder. And Gemara is going to introduce a question regarding this will relate back to the halacha of Mishnah. Shis corresponds because the Necheskel to end it. Daf Achayim appreciate him joining for today's daf. Some of these we're discussing today's daf are whether gerushin is kakamadame. In other words, do we say that doing a certain action that is seemingly inevitable, that you're not going to be able to nullify it, does that show your actions speak louder than words, that you are being mekayim it? Which that relates to the case of our Mishnah, of Gersha bechzira b'bayom. If he divorces her and then he remarries her, which we'll see from that Mishnah, regarding what the halacha is going to be, that in Yochel Hafer, is that going to be related to this idea? Well, okay, because he divorced her, so therefore that's like being mekayim, so therefore he cannot be made for it. Then the next Mishnah discusses on Amud Beis the halacha of derech tamid chacham. The way Talmudic scholars used to be is that until his daughter didn't leave from him before she got married, he would tell her, any neder that you have made in my house, they're going to be nullified. Now, that relates to the question of Baal Ma'asher Yafa B'Leishmiya. Is a man allowed to do hafara if he never even heard the neder? Like, any neder that you ever talk, I'm being made for. But you didn't hear it to know of it to be made for. Which the Gemara ends off with the Machlekes Rabbi Yishua and the Rabbi Yonasan regarding whether a shliach, and this relates to the question that we just mentioned, whether a shliach can make hafara for the mishaleach, and what that's significant is regarding, on the one hand, we always say shluch shalom kamoisai. The agent is like the one who's sending him. But on the other hand, mi kamiti de baalei motzi mei for shliach motzi mashmi. In other words, if the mishaleach, the husband or father, didn't ever hear of the neder, and the shliach does, but if he's not going to be able to do it because he didn't hear it, so how is the shliach going to be able to do something that the mishaleach is not able to do? So we begin the current daf. Again, like I said, we're in the middle of daf Ayin Aleph and Beis, where the Gemara has a question that relate back to the halacha of Mishnah. Following interesting question. Gerushin. When the chassan divorces his kala, is that kishtika damya? Meaning, she took a neder, and now he goes and he divorces her. Is that like silence, because Lamaisi didn't say anything? Oi kakama damya. Or is it like actually validating the neder? Why would that be? So the Ran explains. Since the chassan knows that after he divorces her, he's not going to be able to make for, because it's going to be b'koidman, and he did not do hafara, meaning he's just not going to be engaged to her. He's not going to be engaged to her. And he didn't do hafara before he divorced her. Why didn't you do hafara before he divorced her? Obviously, you're essentially, with your actions, validating it. Just like we say that if he doesn't do the hafara on the day that he hears it, passively he's being mekayim it, wasn't mekayim it, but you had an opportunity, you didn't. That's like a passive akama. Here also, you heard the neder, you knew that you're not going to do it after you divorce her, and you didn't. So that's like being mekayim it. Or do you say that no, it's like silence? So the Gemara says, lamai nafkamina. What's the difference? Who cares? Lamaisa, he didn't, he wasn't made for it. Anyway, it's going to be mekoyim. Says the Gemara, no, the nafkamina is kegoin shenardra. She took a neder, b'shama baila. Her chassan heard about it. The girsha. And he divorces her, which the Ran just points out, when we're saying Baal over here, we must be talking about a chassan. Because if we're talking about Baal like a husband that was married, even if you would say that Gerushin would not be a hakama, it would be a silence, how would he be able to be made for when he's remarrying her, in this case, as we're just going to describe? Because if he takes her back and marries her, well, that we know is generally a rule in Habal Mefer B'Koidman. When you're married, Nisuin, the husband cannot be made for what was pre-existing. And this was pre-existing from before he married her. And if all he does is just gets engaged to her, but the halacha is a chassan can only be made for b'shutfis, with partnership. he has to have the father in that picture. Now, here there's no father. What do I mean there's a father? No. Since she got married, there was Nisuin. Nisuin rips a girl away from her father's reshus. The father plays no role. So even if you're going to say that it's like silence, it wouldn't allow us to make hafara when he remarries her. So says the Ran, we must be talking about a case of when she was engaged. She was engaged, her chassan heard it, he divorced her, v'ahadre b'yomi, and then he remarries her that same day. Now, the reason why it has to be that same day is because he remarries her the next day, so obviously he cannot be made for because he already missed the day of the shmiyah b'yom shamay. Now, even though at the end of the day, after he divorced her, she's not in the domain of the husband, but still, from that day onwards, it's not called b'yom shamay anymore. So he wouldn't be able to go ahead, even though she's not in his rishut, he wouldn't be able to be made for it after that day. Now, the Ran just points out this that we're describing the case of va'ahadra, that this same chassan remarries her. That's lav davka, because the same halacha would be if any other chassan. It has to be that 24-hour period. It's just milsa de shchicha. The guy got upset. He wrote her a get, and he divorced her. Right, and then he has charata, and then a few hours later he goes, "Oh, please, can we get remarried?" And he gets engaged. Okay, so what's the question? If the master says kishtigadami, that divorce is like silence, I wasn't mekayim it. It's just granish gezav. So matzah meifala. He can still be meifel because he's still within b'yom shamay. But if the master says that divorce is kakamadami because you know you're not going to be able to do it afterwards, and you're essentially saying, "Fine, go ahead." He's not going to be able to meifel for her, even if he remarries her on that same day. So what is the halacha? Is gerushin keshtika, or is it kahakamadami? Says Gitin Tabav Bezim and Alv says Gimel Toshamat Zvinga Raya from the following brisa. The brisa says, Amosai Omru, when did they say Meisabal? That if the husband dies, we said Nisreikna Rishus La'av, that it gets emptied out to the domain of the father. When did we say such halacha? When is Nisreikna going to apply? Says the brisa, that's Bizman Shlei Shamabal. If the chassan didn't hear of it, or he heard of it, but it was mefer, or he heard and he was quiet, and he died that day, which the Ran says we explained this already in Daf Samach Chesam and Aleph. What's the criterion? What's the mechanics of Nisreikna? How is it working? Is it chashav enough to be emptied out to the father? Has to be that al kapanim, if you see the common denominator is that there was no hakama. As long as he didn't do hakama, therefore it has to be he heard and he died that same day, because if it was the next day, it was already hakama passively. So either that he didn't hear it, or he was made for it, or he heard and he died that day. But upon him, those are cases that will say when the chassan dies, it's nisreikna, it gets emptied out to the father. Fine. But says the Gemara, you're going to say gerushin is kishtigadami, that divorce is also like silence and not hakama. Listening nami, you should have said another case. Oishama begirish. Another case that the father is going to take over all the rights now is if he hears and he divorces, because that's like a shtika case, and then he's out of the picture, just like mace. In fact, we didn't say this case. Obviously, couldn't for gerushin kalkamadami. That divorce is like validation. Therefore, we could not have said this case, and therefore, no, the father will not get in this reikna because the chastam was mekayim. Says the Gemara, yeah, but aim a sefer. Look at the sefer. The fact that you're being medayik, you're inferring from the reisha that we didn't say gerushin must be because it's not like a shtik, it's like hakama. Well, you could do the same dik in the opposite, that it is like a shtika. Why? Because the sefer says the inverse. Aval, but says the Braisim Shama B'Kayim. If the chassan heard the neder and he validated it, even Shama B'Shasik. Let's say he heard the enemy's quiet, but it may be Shal Achrab. 24 hours went by and he only died the next day, which is essentially a passive akama. Then the father cannot be made for it because again, there's no nisreik. The chassan already validated. He's not getting anything handed over to him from the chassan. Says the Gemara. But if you say gerushin kalkamadamu, that divorce is like validation, which you just told me you want to be medayik definition. So then then you should have said mimshama v'girish. If the chassan heard and he divorces, divorce is a hakama, and that would have been the case that the father cannot go ahead and be made for it by himself. In fact, he didn't say that case. Shema, obviously, Gerushin Kishtikadam. That divorce is like silence. So says the Gemara, obviously, obviously you cannot infer the halacha of Gerushin from this brisa, because as the Gemara explains, if the Reisha is precise, in other words, that we couldn't say the case of Gerushin in the first case, which is when you do say Nisreikna, because no, divorce is like Hakama, then Nasav Sefer Mishim Reisha. Then we only said the Sefer because the Reisha, in other words, where the Ran explains, we only wanted to explain in the Sefer one case, and we just wanted to make it the inverse of the Reisha. So even if the halacha is that Gerushin is Kakamadami, the way you want to be medayek from the Reisha, the reason why I didn't say it in the Sefer was because I'm only saying case in the Sefer that I could say the inverse of the Reisha, and I can't. And Sefer Dafka, and if the Sefer is the precise one, that I couldn't say in the Sefer Gerushin because it's actually like Shtika, so why didn't I then say it in the Reisha? That's another case of Shtika. No, because Nasav Reisha Mishum Sefer. We didn't want to say in the case of Reisha, only case that we could invert in the Sefer, because if you see, the Brisa was saying cases that, he heard and he died today versus tomorrow. We wanted to say cases of when you could flip it, but Gerushin you can't, because it's either one or the other. There's no you can't say Gerushin in both Reish and the Sefer, so therefore we didn't say it. But again, there's no raya because we don't know which diik is the right one to be medayik from. So we must have Tashma to make a raya from our Mishnah. This is where it comes up, this question of Gerushin Kalkama or Shtika, because it relates back to halach of a Mishnah. What did we say in our Mishnah? We said, Nodra v'hiarusam. If let's say the girl took a neder and she was engaged. Okay, in this Garsha, she got divorced. B'nis Ausan, she got engaged. Boy Yom that same day. Afil Lameya, even if it is 100 chasanim, but it's still on the same day. So we said in the Mishnah, Uvio Ubaylo Achar Mafir Nedara. Our father and our chasan, the last one, can be made for a neder together. Ooh, says the Gemara, Shmamino, you have the answer to our question from our Mishnah. You see, the Gerush in this Kishtikadamu. Divorce is like silence. Why? Because since the Mishnah said that it has to be boy by yom, says the Ran, obviously we're talking about that this was already heard before the first chassan died. Now, the Gemara is assuming that who is it that heard this first, that then the chassan died, and therefore has to be by yom. If no one heard it, it doesn't have to be by yom. The last chassan could come in 3 weeks later. If no one ever heard about it, and the only time they heard about it 3 weeks later, then they were able to make for it then. Why does it be by yom? Because someone did hear about it. And we're assuming that it was the chassan. That's why it says by yom. To tell us that Gerushin is kishtika. Because if Gerushin was kakama, obviously then when you're having 100 chasanim, that they divorce, then it wouldn't have that halacha. Meaning, it could be they died, but we don't know. But maybe that's why it's coming to tell us that. Now, because as the Ran says, if it was that the father heard about it, and then these chasanim were out of the picture, then what's the chiddush to say b'bayim? And even though the Gemara is going to answer that, but it's more mistabit to say there's a chiddush over here of coming to tell us that Gerushin is kishtikadami, because dika kamodamu, if divorce was like b'makayimid, mimatzimei for oris achron, you could. How do you know the last chassid could be made for it? Nidri da'oikim oris rishon. If it's divorce, at least you're saying your 100 chassid doesn't say how they're out of the picture. Then how could the last chassid be made for that? If there was already makuyim. Says what are we talking about? We're talking about where the first chassid didn't hear about it. So therefore there was no, even when he divorced, there's no hakama because he never even heard about it. Says if that's the case, so why does it have to be the last chassan heard it on that same day? Why does it have to be remarried on that same day? Even after 100 days, he never heard about it before. No one ever heard about it. So you didn't start the 24-hour period yet. So the Gemara said, no, because yeah, the chassan didn't hear about it. So his divorce wouldn't be a hakama because he didn't know about it. But the reason why it has to be Baba Yom is because the father started the clock ticking because he heard about it. And because of his hearing. The Baba Yom would the Matzah Mefer. Only that day you would be able to do Hafara. After 24 hours, you wouldn't be able to Mefer because the father started the clock ticking already. And once he's Mekayim it, because he's passively not going to be Mefer, then it's not going to help. You have to have both parties be Mefer. Says the Ran explained, and it's not really telling us a chiddush. It's just saying that this is the halacha that since the father heard about it, it's just saying the facts. I mean, it's not saying the chiddush. It's just saying the facts of lamaisa are that it would have to be dafka by bayam, but the next day or some other later day wouldn't work because the father already got this clock ticking. But it's not going to teach us anything regarding the chassan and his divorce, that it's like a shtika because the chassan didn't hear about it to say that his divorce is like a shtika. Maybe his divorce would be akama. He just didn't know about it. So he must. What? What do you mean? No, the chiddush in the Afilah Meya is that the chassan gets to take over the role of the earlier chassanim, like we said. No, the father heard it. The father heard it. Yeah, I mean, so that would seemingly be somewhat of a chiddush that the chassan could come and take over a role. It wasn't. It's really a made for b'kaidment for him. But since the father is still involved,
nobody heard it. If the father heard it, but none of the son heard it.
Right?
He can't be made for it by himself.
That's a shayla. The father could be, but he can't because when there's a chassan, but now the chassan was out of the picture. Now there's a new chassan. That was like when the Ran explained part of that chiddush is that you would say once the chassan's out, now the father has an nisreikna, and he should be able to do it himself. Who cares that she gets re-engaged to someone else? Why is the father mishubah to this last chassan? I already got all the rights already from the first chassan being out of the picture. So that's part of that chiddush that we say. If it's by bayayim, then it's like he's just filling the shoes of the first chassan. So that would be the chiddush. But the halacha of gerushin, to say that's kishtika, that wouldn't be necessarily as part of the chiddush because he didn't hear about it. The father heard about it. So the Gemara says Tashabah. It's being arrived on Mishnah now Pites Amid Aleph. Mishnah says no jubah bayayim. So here, if the girl that's engaged made a neder that day, and girsha, he divorced her, v'echzira, and he remarried her, boy bayayim, that same day, so the Mishnah says on Daf Peites, ein yachal hafar. Oh, he can't do hafar. Now, as the Ran explains, the Gemara is assuming that we're talking about a girl that's engaged, and we're saying that the chassan cannot do hafar. Says the Gemara, Shmamino, you've heard from this, gerushin ka'kamadami. Divorce is like validation. And that's why, obviously, the Mishnah says, has to be B'ay Yom, is talking about when meaning our Mishnah, that the first chassan did not hear about it, and the father heard about it, because if the chassan heard about it, then you're right, if he would divorce her, even if she would get engaged that same day, would not be able to do afara, because as we see in the Mishnah Peites, that it's a mamish mafurish, this halacha, right? If we're talking about a girl that's engaged, if he divorces her, if he marries her that same day, he cannot do afara. Why can't he do afara? Because his gerushin is a hakama. Which they said, no, the truth is that I'll tell you that gerushin is like silence. But hach over here, the reason is because b'nesua askinon, we're talking about where the woman is married. And so, and this marriage, as the Ran's going to explain, is either the first time or the second time. And behind the time of den yach lahafer, and the reason why the husband cannot be mefer is mishum de inabal mefer b'koidmin, is because the husband cannot make hafara on pre-existing the dharm. So therefore, the Ran explains these two cases. He says, therefore, if she was originally engaged, and then when he remarried her, he did nisuin. The reason why he cannot do hafara is because the baal cannot be made for b'koidmin. And when you're getting married now, by the second time, that's nisuin you can't do on anything that was before. So even though you were the chassan that same day, meaning even though I'll tell you that gerushin is that kishtika damya, so then why can't he, same day he's remarrying her, why can't he do hafara? You know why? Because you're getting married. You're having nisuin. Nisuin limits you. Nisuin you can't do even what you yourself was a few hours ago were able to do. And if it's the other way around, if is that she was married the first time, and he divorced her, and now he just got re-engaged her, even on the same day, the reason why he cannot be made for is because since the first time she was married, let's say they were married for 3 years, he gets upset at her, divorces her, and then a few hours later he gets engaged to her, right? But the fact that she was married, that means to say the father was out of the picture, obviously. The moment she gets married or becomes a he's out of the picture. Now that he only became, what? What do you mean? Oh, if there's Erisin in the Suin, it's a regular marriage, yeah. Meaning there's Erisin, every marriage requires Erisin in the Suin. So even though he... yeah, why not? Yeah, I'm just saying, meaning it's a regular marriage. So, if he was married, he removes the father. Now he's only a chassan, but a chassan cannot be made for on his own. He has to have the shutfis of the father. And he's not going to have that shutfis because the father's been out of the picture already. Now, the Ranjas explains this, that the Gemara is saying the reasoning because Einam Baal Mefer B'Koidmin, when really it sounds like that's only for one of the two cases the Ranjas explaining of Arusa B'Tchila B'Naso B'Sayv. That's not really the main reason of Nasu B'Tchila B'Arusa B'Sayv. So he says because the reason also is that because the father is removed, like the Aris in that case, because if not, do you think that a husband is worse than an Aris? So in other words, really it does come back to the principle of Einam Baal Mefer B'Koidmin, that he's not able to go ahead and nullify what's pre-existing, but Al Kapanim, the two reasons really is like the Ran's explaining. When there's two cases, you're right, if all you had was engage and engage, yeah, it could be you'd be able to be mefer, and it wouldn't be like the halacha of the Mishnah Pei test. The reason why it says that you cannot be mefer is because you were either married and got engaged, or you engaged and got married. Either one of those two cases, either because Baal in mefer b'koidmin, because he would be without the father, and the others cannot be mefer, el b'shutfis would get him out of the picture. Now, regarding the halacha, the Ram brings that from the Ramban. Lamaisa, the Gemara does not resolve this question of if gerushin ka'akama or shtika. So it says the Ramban says we go l'chumra that gerushin is like ka'akama, and if she makes a neder and the chassan hears it and he divorces her and he gets engaged that same day, he would not be able to mefer. The Rashba writes, although the Gemara does not resolve it from these Mishnais and Brais that attempted to, you could answer it from a teaching of Shmuel that said on the previous stuff on Ayin Aleph. Shmuel had said, from where do we know that the Aris Achrin can be made from the Dogam Shenirul Arishan at the first chassan? Already heard about it. So you see that obviously he had such a Kabbalah from his Rebbe that when we said in the Mishnah Boy Bayoim was because the chassan had heard about it, and then he divorced, and then you have 100 chasanim, not because the father heard about it. Now, since Shmuel says that, which obviously means to say that even though he heard about it and he does a gerushin, the Aris Achron can be mefer, that we don't leave what was pasha to Shmuel because of what the Gemara has a suffix over here which it doesn't resolve. And if you're going to say, wait a second, so why didn't the Gemara resolve? It's a very important principle that he's about to say. That's why he said this piece. Oftentimes I don't say the halacha parts on the Ran, but he says, if you're going to say, so why don't we resolve the Gemara's question from the teaching of Shmuel? So it says the Ran, you could say, from a Mishnah Brisa, the Gemara wants to resolve it. You don't want to resolve it from a teaching of Amar. And says you find this many times in Shas. You find it in the Gemara in Ein Bein Hamudin of Lamahema Beis that says Hani Kahani. Shluchim Didan or Shluchim Dishmaya. The Kahanim are our Shluchim or the Shluchim of Hashem. And the Gemara does not resolve it over there, even though you can resolve it from a teaching of Rav Amnuna in the first parak of Kedushin of Chav Gimel Beis that's obvious Shluchim Dishmaya, because the Gemara wants to attempt to bring rayas only from teaching of Mishnayos or Brises and not from teaching of Mayrah. And the same thing is also over here. But of course, La Halacha, we're going to go with the teaching of Shmuel, which tells us that says the Rashba Nalik Ramban, and that obviously the Gedushin is not Kakam Nalik Ramban, and rather it is Kashtika Dami, and therefore the Chassan himself would be able to go ahead and make for later on the day. We continue with the next Mishnah. Again, continue on this hafara, this nullification of the vow of the Chassan and the father of a Nar Marasim. Says the Mishnah, interesting custom. Derech Tamid Chachamim. The way of the Talmudic scholars were, his daughter is dating and getting engaged, there's a shidduch, and then they're going to go to get engaged and get married. So until she doesn't leave his house, he would tell her, Tachterel, all the nadarim that you made in my house, the father's benching his daughter, you see the picture, he's getting excited, she's going to get married now, and he tells her, all the nadarim that you took in my house, they are nullified. The chassan also Tamachachim, along the board, he goes to his kala, says, until you come into his domain, he would tell her, all the nadarim that you took until you didn't come into my domain, they are nullified. Now, why would they do this? So the Ran explains, because a Nar Marasa, after she has Nisuin, remember she was engaged. There's a Nar Marasa where the chassan and the father have the joint rights to be made for her neder. And we're saying before she does consular shusa, which means Nisuin, so they would do this they would do these phrases, these sentences that they would tell her, because when she gets married, there's no mahafar for Nadarim, because that's kaidmin for the husband. So the custom of the father and the chassan, when they were Talmid Chachamim, was to be made for Nadarim before she gets married. And the Gemara is going to explain, this hafara, is this before they heard the actual neder, or is it after? Because it sounds like whatever Nadarim you talk, we're being made for. Together, the shver, the aidim, the chachumim, they say they walk over to the kal and say, I want you to know, whatever Nadarim, it's mufa. The reason is, says the Mishnah, because the moment she enters into his domain, in Yochel Hafer, cannot be made for anymore, because again, once you have Nisuin, you cannot be made for what was pre-existing condition before the marriage. Now, what's going to relate directly to this halacha, the Gemara asked the following question. It says Baal, which Ran explains, Baal does not necessarily mean a chassan, a husband. It's whatever, it's a chassan, it's a husband, it's a father. Any man that has this role of nullifying the vow is the same question. What's the halacha? Could he do the hafara without hearing the neder? For example, he didn't hear, he doesn't know about it, if she took a neder at all. What's the halacha? Could it be made for on a doubt, a hunch that he has? What's the Gemara's question? The Gemara says very posh. When the pasuk says, isha, and the man is going to hear and he's going to go nullify the vow, is that dafku? Is that, yeah? A gzech as a kasser, state in pasuk medaf herin, you have to hear it? I love dafku. It's not exact. It's just, that's the normal way. Usually you hear, so you nullify. You don't have to have, it's not din shmiya. You could be made for even if you didn't hear the neder. Someone over says, Tashmat, to be right for our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, Derech Tamid HaChacham, the custom of the Talmud scholars was, until his daughter didn't leave from him. Oimala, we tell her, Sarala, Kol Nedarim Shenedarta B'Teich Beisi, as a nusach, as a comes to her, old in the Nedarim that you took in my house, Harein Mufarin, they are nullified. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Vole Shama. From the fact that you're saying old in the Nedarim, sounds like he didn't hear it. Because if he heard it, he should have said, Neder, ploini, the one that you said you're not going to eat pizza anymore, the one that, it should say with it, what's called Nedarim, it sounds like something he didn't hear it. So you see that Mashama Isha is loved davka, that you can be mefer a Neder. Says the Gemara, no. L'chishamahu de mefer. In other words, when he's going to subsequently hear the Nedarim that she took, then he's going to go ahead and be made for it. So he's being made for it for when he's going to hear it. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. And again, if that's the case, ki loy shama, when he didn't hear it, lo malei lameima. Why is he saying this? In other words, what are you being made for it because of the doubt for hafara that's not effective? Because anyway, you're telling me he's going to go ahead and be made for it when he hears her Nedarim. Could you tell me for Shlomi Isha's dafka, right? You tell me he has to hear it. So what's the point of saying it if it has no effectiveness? The Gemara says, no. What the Mishnah is teaching us is the custom of a Talmudic scholar is lahadure. What does that mean? Meaning, he goes to her and he starts telling her these words. And he says, whatever the Nedarim that you took, they're nullified. Why? Because he wants to get her into a conversation that she's going to start thinking and say, well, what do you mean, Tati? He says, no, I just want you to know, you're going to get married, there's Nedarim. Sometimes girls get upset about certain things, or they get passionate, and they get inspired, and they heard a shiur, and they hear a shmooze, and they say, I'm taking a neder, then I'm going to say shir shiurim every day for the next, 7 years, and I just want you to know. And then she says, oh, you're right. I remember once that Rebbetzin gave his class, and I took a neder, and he's going, aha, and he's been made for it. So it's just really some type of a tactic to get her to start thinking so he can go ahead and be mefer. And you're right, he can't be mefer until he hears about it. And when he hears it, then he's going to be mefer. Now, the Ran says, why do you have to give such a doichik teretz? It seems a little bit pushing it. Why don't you just say that he told her, l'chish shemana? In other words, before he hears it, he tells her that it's going to be nullified when I hear it. And then it's going to be effective. And this is actually what the Gemara gives later on, as we'll see in a moment, regarding the chassan. So says the Gemara that, no, you can't compare it. Why? Because later on, when we answer this, and this is very important, that's talking about when someone tells his wife, when he hears it, she's going to be in his domain. Very important chilik, as we'll see this in a moment. The Ram's going to explain it when we're talking about the next case. So therefore it's going to be effective. But over here, for the father to say, when I'm going to hear it, then it's going to be mefer, she already left the father's domain because she's already married. So if he's going to say that I'm nullifying it l'chishamanu when I hear it, what's going to be? When he's going to hear it, she's not in his reshus anymore. So that's not effective. The Gemara couldn't say, l'chishamanu. But when I'm going to hear it, then it'll be, if you hold the b'shama of is dafka, so why don't you just say, fricked around that, I'm telling her now that when I'll hear about it, it's mufar. So it's going to be automatically in place. You can't, because she's getting married in a few days. When she gets married, she's out of the picture. You can't. When you hear it, nothing's going to happen. So therefore, the Gemara has to say this answer that you're right. He's just trying to get into a conversation and go ahead and then be made for when he actually hears it. So the Gemara says, okay, but Tashma be safe. Let's bring it right from the sefer of our Mishnah, because this tactic, like we said, was not only by the father; it was also v'chinabal. The chassan would do the same thing. Actually, the council of until she did not come into his domain. So he would tell her that this phraseology that, whatever Nedarim you took, but he didn't hear it. Says the Gemara, Hachanami. Here also, which according to the Girsa of our Gemara, as we'll see in the moment in the round, the word Nami is really extra. But the Amala, that he tells her, no, L'chi Shamana. Now, let's first say the Ran's Girsa. This is on the first wide line. The Ran says, his Girsa that he has, the Hanami L'chi Shama, when he hears it. So then the question is, what do you mean when he hears it? What's the point of saying it now? You're going to hear it, then you'll be made for it. Haval Kamash Malan. That's the chiddush, the urcha, the tzum rabban, and la'duri, that, that's what Tamil Chacham they do, that they try to get her at their conversation. Says the Ran, that's the girsa in some of the Svarim, and it says according to that girsa, the Gemara is answering the same thing it said by the father. It's just the chassan's getting her into a conversation, and she's like, what do you mean chassan? He says, I don't know, sometimes, and she'll say, I thought it did make it, and then it'll be made for it. But he says there are certain nischayis that have the girsa like the way we have it in our Gemara, that he tells her, L'chi Shamana. He tells her that when I'm going to hear about it. In other words, because they hold that although that regarding the father, that we said that after he hears it, when she's married, he's not going to be made for. So here also by the chassan, after he hears about it, he's not going to be able to made for when she gets married, because in about made for b'koidmin, and now that she's married, he's not going to be able to nullify pre-existing conditions. Says the Ran, no, even so, the Gemara is giving this answer of L'chi Shamana, because although regarding the father, we cannot say L'chi Shamana, by the husband, you could give such an answer. That if he tells her before he hears about it, that when I hear it, it's going to be mufar, that's going to work. Why? So the Ran said this before, and now he says a little more detailed. He says, because by the father, I understand that he cannot do this, because when she gets married, she's totally leaving his reshus. So he can't tell her, when I hear it, Sheifalah, 3 months later, you're going to come to visit me for Shabbos. I'm going to hear about it. I'm going to be very upset. I want you to know now that you're still in my domain, it's going to be mufar, because when he hears it, it's not going to be, his hearing does nothing, because she's already married. But by the chassan, to the contrary, when he's going to get married, she's actually coming more into his domain. So why do we say that a chassan cannot be made for by koidmin? Is because the father is removed. But over here, since the father already nullified his portion before she get married, and the chassan also is combining his hafara together with the hafara of the father before she gets married, so although that when the hafara of the chassan is going to take effect, the father's already moved, and then he can't do it because it's going to be b'koyman. No, even so, he's going to be able to make for it. And actually, even moreover, says Ran, maybe you could even say that when he hears it, the hafara is going to take effect retroactively from now, when he's a chassan, because he says l'chi shamana, and therefore combines together with the hafar of the father, and it says the Ran, that's how he wants to explain that gear, so that we have in our Gemara that the chassan could say l'chi shamana, meaning not like the father that we said that it's l'chi shama hu de that when he's going to hear it's going to be mefer, he has to actually hear it first and then be mefer. No, chassan could say when I'm going to hear it, which is going to be a few months later when we get married, that's going to be effective because actually she's coming more into his domain. And he already said his hafara now, and when he hears it, he's an active role, he's a real player. So therefore, again, you have no raya from our Mishnah regarding this question yet of B'shama Avi or not, because you could say that maybe B'shama Avi is dafka. So what are they doing? The father is just getting into a conversation, and the chassan is, he could do it for when he hears it, that it'll be retroactive from now. The Mishnah says, okay, Tashma to make a different raya from Mishnah of Ayin Hey. Mishnah says, if someone says to his wife, Kol Nedarim Shetaduri, all Nedarim that you're going to take at Sha'avim Malakim Ploini. until I come from that place. Harein kayamin, meaning he tells his wife, I want you to know, whatever neder you take, I am validating right now. So the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Hey later on tells us Lo Yom hasn't said anything, and we'll explain over there in that Mishnah why that is. But let's say he says Harein Mufareh. He tells his wife, he knows his wife to be that type. She gets very inspired and she takes Nedarim. He says, I'm going away for a few weeks. I don't want to come back and see you here with like 17 Nedarim that you took while I was away. I want you to know, any neder you take till I come back are all automatically nullified. So we have a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer says, Mufer. Okay, he already pre-nullified her vows. And the Chacham say, no, it's not Mufer. Says the Gemara, but V'alei Shama. What are you doing? You didn't even hear her vow. You're saying this before you even left on your trip. Now, the Ram points out, the Gemara is resolving this question not only from Rabbi Eliezer, but even from the Rabbanan. Why? Because up until this point, we don't find the Rabbanan disagreeing with Rabbi Eliezer only because it didn't yet take effect. And as we see, as they respond over there, that since it didn't even come to the category of Hekem, can't validate it yet because it didn't even make the neder yet, so therefore he cannot be made for, as we'll see that on that daf. Hafara and Hakama have to be similar. But over here, we already took the neder, meaning in the Gemara that we're discussing, where it came to the category of Hekem, according to everyone, the Hafara would be effective even though he didn't hear. There, Rabbi Eliezer says, she didn't even make it yet, and you could already be made for. And the Chacham would agree, it's only because you can't be making, so you can't be made for, because she didn't make it yet. But if she was, even though you didn't hear it, sounds like everyone would agree, you can be made for. Aha, you see, B'Shama Yisha's love Davka. Says the Gemara, Nahachanami here also Dama, where he says, L'chi Shamana, when I'm going to hear it. Which the Ran just points out, according to the other Girsa that had the Girsa, that then here it's talking about L'chi Shamana, so the Girsa over here would be also Hachanami Dama L'chi Shamana, which actually is the Girsa that we have, but because the Ran's Girsa is actually Hachanami L'chi Shama, when he hears it. And he says, from Taisis, it's not to say where he says Stam, Mufalechi, and the ned is bottled from itself when he hears it. Rather, he tells explicitly that it's going to be bottled when I hear it. So either way, the point is that it won't take effect just by saying it. It has to be that you're saying that L'chi Shamana, because V'Shama Isha would be Dafka. And you would have to hear it first to be able to nullify it. So then the Gemara says, B'Valama li min hashto. Why does the Mishnah say the case where the guy's telling his wife, everything that you're taking from now, I'm mufachin. If you tell me he has to hear it anyway, so why are you telling me now? When am I going to hear it? It's going to be moving. When you hear it, be made for it. First after Zoginyet. You anyway have to wait for the hearing. So he thinks maybe that moment I'm going to be very perturbed. I'm going to be very busy. I'm going to hear it. But I'm not going to pay attention. I'm going to get busy, like all those things you want to do, and you forgot to put into your calendar and your reminder on your phone. So, I forgot. I remember my wife had a neder wife, 3 p.m., be mafer, right? And I forgot to put it into my phone. And if it's not on the phone, it's not in your mind. So you weren't made for it. So he says, I'll do it now. I'll pre-made for it. That's why he does it. So it's not a raya, again, to the Shab B'Shama Isha. It says, it's being a raya from another brisa. Brisa says, someone says to a caretaker, meaning this guy leaves and he has, like we have the live-ins, and Talmudic times they have the patrapas. We have a live-in, we leave everyone, our kids, our jewelry, everything with this live-in, they can do whatever they want. In Talmudic times they had a patrapas, a caretaker. So he tells his caretaker, look, do me a favor. He says, my wife, she's a very spiritual woman, she gets very into Nedarim, and so whatever neder my wife's going to make, mikan from here, meaning from when I go on my trip, until I come back from the Bahamas, which that's the wording of from here, because he's going on a trip to there, therefore he doesn't say from today. But be that as it may, this is rhyming a lot. He says, Hofer, so he says, do me a favor, be mefer this, any neder she makes. And Bahafala, and the caretaker does very well. He has a tracker on the wife, and anytime she says the word neder, it comes up on his phone, and he hears neder, and he goes and he's made for the neder. Yochel Yumafarin says the Brisa, you would think, okay, he made a shliach, he made a caretaker, you would think it would be mufer. The moment pasuk says Mamidbar, Isha yikemena, her husband will be mekaymen, the Isha yifarena, and her husband will be mefer, which the Ran explains. Since the Torah said the word Isha, her husband, 2 times, it sounds like no, it has to be dafka, her husband, and not a shliach. That's the Rabbi Shloimy holds, it's not going to be able to be done through a shliach. Amalei Rabbi Yomi says to him, what do you mean? Metzina b'chal terah kula. We find this throughout the entire Torah. Shluchai shel adam k'maisai. The agent of a person is like him. It is Isha, as the Gemara learns in Kedush Abem Beis. So therefore, the shliach, the abetrabes could do it. Okay, but says the Gemara, Rabbi Shloimy, even Rabbi Yisha didn't say that the shliach cannot do it. Because it's a biblical decree. Because he's learning, the pasuk says, Isha kamen v'shikban, that extra word Isha, and therefore it would preclude a shliach. But if not for that, he would also agree, shliach sham kamaisa. Wait a second, because you tell me, according to everyone, shliach sham kamaisa, the agent of the person like himself, and therefore the shliach, the apitrabas, the caretaker could do it. But I have a very practical problem. But the husband didn't hear the neder. Obviously, you don't need Vishama Isha. You don't need the husband to hear it. Says the Ram, wait a second. Maybe you're going to say that you do need hearing. But here it's different because the Apitrabas heard it. And since you say the Allah of Shaladim Kemaisai, it's like the husband heard it. You're telling me he's him. So if he's him, and then we can be made for it for him. So he heard it for him. So maybe you do need Vishama Isha, but he's the Isha, because he's the shliach of the husband. So the Ram brings from the Taisis in the name of Rabbi Yosef that no, that's not the case. If the halacha would be that you need shemiya, you need to hear it, do you think it's possible that the husband will not be able to be mefer? He himself cannot be mefer. Forget about the shliach. He himself cannot be mefer because he didn't hear it. He's off in the Bahamas. He's somewhere, no phones allowed. He's taking a week retreat, doesn't want to hear from or see anyone. The shliach, how could he do the shlichus of the Baal if the Baal himself cannot do it? Says the Ran, for this same reason, the Gemara tells us in Brayso Masechtas Nazav Yud Beis and Beis that it's like Rebbe Lezer, who holds a person can be made for the Nedarim of his wife before she takes a neder. Why? Because if it was going like Rabbanan, how could Rabbi Yomi say we find the whole Torah Shluchim Kamaisai? What do you mean? Is there such a thing that he himself cannot be made for because his wife didn't make a neder yet and he can make a shliach? So therefore, obviously, the Gemara says we could prove that you don't need to hear it because when the Apatrabas hears it, my hava. If the Baal cannot be made for because he didn't hear, then shliach also cannot be made for. Even if he says Shluchim Kamaisai, but it can't be. But if the mishalech can't do it, then you can't make a shliach to do it. Why can't he do it? Because he didn't hear it. Even if I'll say that he's me, but I'm me, I'm also me. You can't be more me than me. And if I can't do it because I didn't hear it, then you can't do it either. That's what making a shliach. Yeah, but you, if I can't, you also could do it. That's what shliach mikamaisa is. But if I, the mishalech, cannot do it, then you can't do it. I want you to do it for me. But I can't do it, then you can't do it either. Why can I not do it? Because I didn't hear it. Only by Nedarim or? Oh, everything. All halachas of Mishaleach. I could do it. I just technically, no, that's a technicality. I'm just not there. I could do it.
Technically, if I would be here, I would hear it.
Yeah, but that's not a technicality. It's intrinsic mechanism for the halachas of Nedarim. So if you hold that B'Shama Isha is Dafka, then it shouldn't be able to work. Obviously, that no, Bisha, that B'Shama Aviyah, B'Shama Bala is Lav Dafka.
If it would be on the day of, then he could, like he can call up the shliach, say, whatever.
No, but you have to hear it. What? He has to hear it. Shaz, what does it mean, hearing it?
But then it would be the same.
He has to at least hear of it, it sounds like. He doesn't have to actually hear it. He has to hear of it. Yeah, he has to find out. But if he's away, he's overseas, and he doesn't know of it. So the Apatrabas hears of it, and he's made for it. So the Gemara is going to say something similar to that. The Gemara is going to say something similar. The Gemara does say, let's finish up, let's see. The Gemara says in Taba Ayin Gimel, Hachanami do Amarle, he tells the Apatrabas, it's not actually not what you're saying, but it's interesting, so let's just see how the Gemara finishes off. He tells the Apatrabas, all the Nedam that my wife is going to make, that L'chishamana, that when I come back, tell her that he's telling this to the Apatrabas, that L'chishamana, when I hear it, and again, there's different girsayos over here, that Meifrla, that I'm going to be Meifrit for her. Meaning, as the Ran explains, the Apatrabas tells this wording to the woman, that your neder is mufer for you when your husband is going to hear about this. But if he just tells her stam, that's mufer. No, because you're right. The apotropos cannot be better than the husband, and the husband himself requires that to say explicitly that it's mufer, and you can only do it when he hears about it, like we said, or when he says l'chi shamana. So the apotropos has to say l'chi shamana when he hears about it. In other words, there has to be an element of her being told when he's going to hear about it. And then you could do the hafara that way. But again, you have to have. It could be b'shama isha's dafka.
But nothing's happening now.
So the Gemara says l'chi shama leifalahu. So when he hears about it, tell me may for it. Because since at the end of the day, he's saying the hafara does not take effect until he hears about it. So that moment, he'll do it himself. What? Yeah. Yeah. So says the Gemara, and this is the last point, Sava Dilma Matridna. He thinks, no, maybe I'll be busy when I come back. I'm not going to remember to be Nefer HaNedarim, and therefore he wants the apotropos to tell her this. When the husband's going to come home, he's going to hear about it. It's going to be automatically mufer because he wants me to be mefered, and the shlich could do it because when he's going to come, and then he's going to hear, and then he's going to be able to do it. Then retroactively, the shlich was able to be mefered for him, but it only takes effect because it could be b'shama is dafka. Now, the Ran just points out one last point. He says, within the Gemara Nazir, Daf Yud Beis, the Gemara asks, this that you're explaining that it's going the Bryce like Rabbi Eliezer that says that the husband can be made for a neder of his wife even though they didn't take effect yet. So why does he have to make an apotropos? Why doesn't he make it when he leaves that when he's going to hear it, it's going to take effect? What do you need apotropos for? So the Gemara answers because he thinks maybe I'm going to forget, I'm going to be upset, I'm going to be caught up when I'm going to actually that moment when I'm going to hear about it. But then the question is, so why doesn't he make it now, before he leaves, that when he hears about it, when he comes back? Says around, no. He doesn't want to be made for a nadarim that she's taking right now when he's still here, because maybe she's going to make a neder that he is pleased with. And he doesn't want to be made for that yet. But then the question is, so why doesn't he do it now, that any nadarim that she's going to take from when he leaves until he comes back? So Nedarim says, to me, it's possible that the husband's concerned that maybe I'm going to want to retract this hafar. And if I'm going to make it right now, like Rabbi Eliezer, I'm not going to be able to retract. But when I make it apotropos, every single moment, he has the ability that he could retract the shlichus. And therefore, he doesn't want to do himself. He definitely wants a shlich because he could revoke the shlichus that he made. And he says this question, even though the Gemara does not resolve it over here, it is resolved from the question that the Gemara is giving shortly, as we'll see on the next daf, that the husband could be made for even without hearing it, as we're going to explain shortly. And therefore, the way the Ran says, we'll see that he does. It's lav dafka. He doesn't have to actually hear it to be made for it. Thank you to any time, and then therefore we'd work apotropos also. Shliach doesn't have to actually hear it.